The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but Dr. Olivia Brooks was still wide awake, moving from patient to patient with practiced efficiency. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a sterile glow over the emergency room. After nearly 16 hours on her feet, fatigue clung to her like a second skin, but her mind remained sharp. It had to be. She trained herself to push past the exhaustion, to focus solely on her work. Anything else, her feelings, her life beyond these walls, didn't matter tonight. She had just finished examining a patient when the ambulance doors burst open. The stretcher rolled in fast, with paramedics moving in sync, their voices overlapping with quick reports. Olivia's instincts kicked in before she even saw him. The patient was unconscious, covered in blood, his clothes torn and stained. There was something different about him, though. Even before they wheeled him into her line of sight, Olivia felt an unshakable pull. She quickly approached, pulling on a pair of gloves. "What do we have?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Male mid-30s found unconscious. No ID. Possible blunt force trauma to the head, multiple lacerations. Probably a car accident, but we're not sure. He was just there," one of the paramedics explained, his tone uneasy. Olivia looked down at the man lying on the stretcher. His face was a mess of bruises, but underneath she could see the sharp angles of his jaw, the strong lines of someone used to being in control. But now he was utterly helpless. Vulnerable. "We need to get him stabilized," Olivia ordered, falling into the rhythm of her work. She guided the team, her hands moving with precision as she assessed his injuries. The man's breath was shallow, his pulse weak, but he was hanging on. For some reason she found herself willing him to survive. As the hours ticked by, Olivia worked tirelessly to save the man's life. There was no moment to consider why she was so focused on him, why she felt an inexplicable connection to this stranger. She was a professional after all, and her job was to save lives. Yet, with every stitch, every adjustment, she couldn't shake the growing sense that this was no ordinary patient. When they finally moved him to a recovery room, Olivia hovered near his bedside for a moment longer than she should have. His face was still swollen, but his breathing had stabilized. He looked peaceful now, the violence of whatever had happened to him fading slightly. As she turned to leave, a faint whisper caught her attention. She looked back, startled. His eyes fluttered open, just a sliver meeting hers. For a split second their gazes locked. His eyes were deep, intense, as if they held 1,000 stories. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. And then, just as quickly as he had awoken, his eyes closed again. Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the man. His injuries were severe, but something else gnawed at her. The way his eyes had met hers for just a moment, holding on to a silent plea before he slipped back into unconsciousness. Over the next few days she found herself returning to his room more often than usual, checking his vitals, wondering who he really was. The hospital had no record of him, no ID, no family coming to claim him. It was as though he had appeared out of thin air. Each time she entered his room, there was a strange sense of connection, one she couldn't quite explain. Something about him drew her in. The nurses began to notice her frequent visits, exchanging curious glances when they thought she wasn't looking. On the third evening, as Olivia finished her shift, she decided to check on him one last time before heading home. She walked down the hallway, her mind filled with unanswered questions, and pushed open the door to his room. But the bed was empty. A wave of confusion washed over her as she stepped into the room. The sheets were tossed aside, the monitors still humming softly, but the man she had saved was gone. "Where is he?" Olivia demanded from the nearest nurse at the station. The nurse frowned, flipping through the chart. "He was here an hour ago. We haven't discharged him. There's no record of him leaving." Panic flickered in Olivia's chest. How could someone so badly injured vanish without a trace? She ran to the security office, hoping the cameras would reveal something, but there was nothing. No footage of him walking out, no sign of anyone coming to get him. It was as though he had evaporated from the hospital entirely. The police were notified, but with no identification or records, they had little to go on. Olivia stood in the empty room later that night, staring at the place where the man had been. She couldn't shake the feeling that his disappearance wasn't random. She had saved his life, and now it felt like he had taken something intangible with him when he left. A piece of her thoughts, her curiosity, and something deeper she couldn't name. Who was he? Why had he disappeared? And why did she feel like his departure was just the beginning of something far bigger than she could imagine? 5 years had passed, and Olivia had almost convinced herself that the mysterious man from the hospital was just a distant memory. Almost. Her career had soared since that night. She was now a leading surgeon, respected and admired by her peers. The demands of the hospital kept her busy, too busy to dwell on the past, or so she told herself. Yet, in quiet moments, when the hospital fell silent after a long shift, her mind drifted back to him. There were so many questions left unanswered. She had tried to forget him, to move on, but there were days when she would see a flash of dark hair in a crowd, or hear a deep voice that sounded eerily familiar, and her heart would leap before the moment passed. It was ridiculous, she knew. He had disappeared without a trace. Why would he ever reappear in her life? It wasn't until an unexpected invitation arrived at her apartment one evening that she felt the pull of her past again. The envelope was elegant, the kind that suggested wealth and exclusivity. Inside, an invitation to a high-profile charity gala at one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Olivia almost tossed it aside. Galas weren't her thing, but something caught her eye. At the bottom of the card was a handwritten note. "It's time for answers. I'll be waiting." Her pulse quickened as she read the words over again. It couldn't be. After all these years? The night of the gala arrived faster than she anticipated. Dressed in a simple black gown, Olivia stepped into the grand ballroom, her heart pounding. The room was filled with the city's elite, men and women in designer suits and gowns, smiling and sipping champagne. She felt out of place, but there was no turning back now. And then she saw him. Across the room, his eyes met hers and time seemed to stop. He was different, sleeker, more polished, but there was no mistaking it. Jack Harrison. The man she had saved 5 years ago was standing in front of her once again, as if no time had passed. Olivia's feet felt rooted to the ground as Jack made his way through the crowd toward her. She couldn't believe it was him, standing there so composed, so confident. He had changed in every way except for his eyes, those same intense, dark eyes that had haunted her for years. "Olivia," Jack said, his voice smooth and steady. He offered a small smile, but it was guarded, as though he knew the questions that were about to come. "Jack," she managed to reply, still reeling from the shock. "You disappeared?" He didn't flinch. "I had no choice." "No choice? I saved your life and you just vanished without a word. Do you have any idea what I went through trying to figure out who you were?" Jack's smile faded, replaced by a look of genuine regret. "I know. I owe you an explanation, but this isn't the place for it." Olivia felt her anger rising, but beneath it, curiosity still burned. She wanted to demand answers right then and there, but something in his tone made her pause. He wasn't brushing her off. He was protecting her from something. "Tomorrow," Jack said softly, stepping closer, his presence commanding. "Meet me. I'll tell you everything." She hesitated, but she couldn't deny the pull he had on her, the questions that had gone unanswered for so long. Reluctantly she nodded. As he turned to walk away, Olivia reached out, catching his arm. "Wait." He stopped, looking at her expectantly. "Why now?" she asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. "Why come back after all this time?" Jack's gaze softened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "Because I owe you the truth. And because I couldn't stay away anymore." His words lingered in the air long after he had disappeared into the crowd, leaving Olivia standing alone, her mind swirling with emotions. Anger, curiosity, and something else, something she wasn't ready to name yet. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The next evening, Olivia found herself sitting in a quiet cafe, her mind racing as she waited for Jack to arrive. She had spent the entire night replaying their conversation, her thoughts spinning in 1,000 different directions. Why had he returned? And why did she feel so drawn to him even after all these years? When Jack finally walked in, the world seemed to narrow around them. He moved with the same confidence she had seen at the gala, his eyes locking onto hers the moment he stepped through the door. "Olivia," he said, sitting down across from her. "I'm glad you came." "I almost didn't," she admitted, her voice sharper than she intended. "You disappeared without a trace, and now you want to act like nothing happened?" Jack leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't want to pretend nothing happened. I'm here to explain why." "Then start explaining," Olivia shot back, her patience running thin. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wasn't just some random guy who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, Olivia. I'm involved in something. Something dangerous." Olivia's heart pounded. "What kind of dangerous?" He hesitated, then met her gaze. "I'm part of a covert organization. I was on a mission the night you saved me. Things went wrong and I had to disappear. It wasn't safe for you to be involved." Her mind spun, trying to process the weight of what he was saying. A covert organization? Like a spy? "Not exactly, but close enough," Jack replied, his voice calm. I didn't want to drag you into this, but I've been watching over you, making sure you were safe. Watching over me? Olivia's voice cracked. You mean spying on me? I had to, Jack said, his tone softening. You were in danger even if you didn't know it. The revelation hit her like a wave. Jack hadn't just vanished. He had been hiding, protecting her from a world she didn't even know existed. But the betrayal still stung. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered, her voice trembling. Jack reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Because I didn't want you to get hurt. But I'm here now and I need you to trust me. Olivia stared at him, torn between the anger still bubbling inside her and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. He had lied to her, kept secrets, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't lying about his feelings. Without thinking, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Jack met her halfway, his lips brushing hers in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss full of unspoken promises and fragile trust, one that left her breathless and confused all at once. As they pulled away, Olivia's heart raced. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: she was in too deep now to turn back. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Olivia found herself spending more and more time with Jack, unable to pull away despite the questions that still lingered in the back of her mind. He was a mystery, a man wrapped in secrets, and yet she couldn't deny the way she felt when she was with him. But that all came crashing down one night when Jack finally revealed the truth, the full truth. They were sitting in his apartment, the dim light casting shadows on the walls as Jack paced back and forth. Olivia watched him, her chest tightening with anticipation. She had pushed him for answers, demanded to know what he was really hiding, and now it seemed he was ready to give them to her. Olivia, there's more you need to know, Jack began, his voice tense. What I told you about being in a covert organization, it's true. But it's not the whole story. Her heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? Jack stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto hers. I was being hunted 5 years ago. The people who were after me, they're not just criminals. They're part of something bigger. And they're still out there. Olivia swallowed hard. So, what does this have to do with me? Jack took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. When I started looking into them again recently, I found something. Something that connects you to all of this. Her stomach dropped. Me? How could I be connected to this? It's your family, Olivia, Jack said softly. Your father? He wasn't just an ordinary businessman. He was involved with the same people who've been hunting me. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. That's impossible. My father was a good man. He wouldn't have been involved in anything like this. I know it's hard to believe, Jack said, his voice gentle. But the files I found, they were buried deep, but they show a connection between him and some very dangerous people. Olivia shook her head, her mind spinning. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I wasn't sure, Jack admitted. I wanted to protect you from this. But now they're getting closer. They know who you are, Olivia. And they're going to come after you. The room seemed to spin around her. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, was unraveling in front of her. What do we do now? Jack's expression hardened. We fight. We find out the truth and we stop them before it's too late. The following days felt like a blur of movement and fear. Olivia's mind was still reeling from Jack's revelation, her father's connection to the dangerous world Jack inhabited, and now she found herself caught in the crossfire. It started subtly. Strange cars idling outside her apartment. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Jack had been right. Someone was watching her and they were getting closer. One night, after a particularly long shift at the hospital, Olivia returned home to find her door slightly ajar. Her heart raced as she stood frozen on the threshold, her mind running through all the possibilities. She hadn't left the door unlocked. Just as she was about to turn and leave, a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her back into the darkness. Panic surged through her, but before she could scream, a familiar voice whispered in her ear. Olivia, it's me, Jack. He released her and she turned to face him, her heart still hammering in her chest. What the hell, Jack? You can't just... Shoo, he whispered, his eyes scanning the room. We don't have much time. They're here. I came to get you out. Fear gripped her. Who's here? What are you talking about? Jack pulled her toward the back door, his movements quick and efficient. The people who've been hunting me. The ones I told you about. They found you, Olivia. We need to leave. Now. Her mind raced, but her body moved on instinct, following Jack through the darkened apartment. How do you know they're after me? I've been tracking them, Jack said, his voice tense. They've been circling around you for days, waiting for the right moment. We can't stay here any longer. Olivia wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the urgency in Jack's voice kept her silent. They slipped out into the night, Jack leading the way as they moved through the city streets. As they rounded a corner, Olivia glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of movement in the shadows. Her pulse quickened, and for the first time she realized just how real this danger was. This wasn't some distant threat, this was happening now. Jack pulled her into a narrow alleyway, pressing her back against the wall. "We're almost there," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A safe house," Jack replied. "We'll be safe there. I promise." But even as he said the words, Olivia could see the worry etched into his features. He wasn't sure they would be safe. Not anymore. The safe house Jack had led her to was hidden in a rundown building on the outskirts of the city. It was nothing more than a series of small rooms, sparsely furnished and cold, but it offered a temporary refuge from the danger that loomed outside. Olivia could feel the weight of the walls closing in on her as they settled inside, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Jack moved with a sense of urgency, his body tense as he made calls and checked their surroundings. Olivia watched him from across the room, the distance between them growing even as they shared this small space. She was angry, confused, and terrified all at once. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Jack glanced at her, his expression hard. "Now we wait. We figure out our next move." Olivia shook her head, the frustration bubbling up inside her. "I didn't ask for this, Jack. I didn't ask to be dragged into your world." "I know," he replied softly, his eyes softening for a moment. "I never wanted you to be part of this. But you are now." Olivia's anger flared. "Because of you. You brought this into my life." Jack didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I was trying to protect you." "By keeping secrets from me?" Olivia snapped. "By not telling me the truth about my own father?" Jack opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, there was a loud crash outside. Both of them froze, their eyes locking in a moment of shared understanding. The danger had arrived. "They're here," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. Olivia's heart raced as Jack grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the small room at the back of the safe house. They crouched low, the walls pressing in around them as the sound of footsteps echoed outside. "They're coming for us, aren't they?" Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. Jack's grip tightened on her hand. "I won't let them hurt you." The door burst open with a deafening crash, and suddenly the room was filled with shadows. Jack moved quickly, stepping in front of Olivia as the first man lunged toward them. The fight was fast, brutal. Jack took down the first attacker with practiced efficiency, but there were more, too many. Olivia's instincts kicked in. She wasn't going to be a bystander in this. Her eyes darted to the medical kit on the table. She grabbed a syringe, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. As one of the attackers moved toward Jack, Olivia lunged, plunging the syringe into the man's neck. He staggered, collapsing to the floor. Jack glanced back at her, surprise flickering in his eyes, but there was no time to dwell on it. More men flooded into the room, and Olivia knew they were running out of time. They fought side by side, Olivia using her medical knowledge in ways she never thought she would. They were outnumbered, but they fought as one, refusing to give in to the fear that threatened to overwhelm them. By the time the last man fell, Olivia was shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Jack stood beside her, his chest heaving, his eyes dark with determination. "We're not safe yet," he said, his voice grim. "But we've bought ourselves some time." Olivia nodded, her body trembling with adrenaline. For the first time she realized just how far she was willing to go to survive, and how much she trusted Jack despite everything. The aftermath of the fight left the air thick with tension and exhaustion. Jack and Olivia stood in the quiet room, surrounded by the unconscious forms of their attackers. Their breaths came in shallow gasps, and for a moment, all Olivia could feel was the rush of survival coursing through her veins. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the weight of everything hit her hard. The reality of her situation, of being hunted, of the secrets Jack had kept from her, of her father's involvement in a world she never knew existed, came crashing down. She sank into the nearest chair, her body trembling as her mind raced to catch up with her emotions. Jack stood by the window, his eyes scanning the street below, ever vigilant. Olivia watched him, her heart heavy with conflicting feelings. She wanted to be angry with him, to push him away for all the lies and secrecy, but she couldn't. Not after what they had just been through. Not after he had fought to protect her, risking his life for hers. Are you okay? Jack's voice broke the silence, soft and filled with concern. Olivia looked up at him, her chest tight with unspoken emotions. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to feel right now. Jack moved closer, his eyes filled with guilt and something deeper, something more vulnerable. I never wanted this for you, Olivia. I never wanted you to be in danger. But you put me in danger, she said, her voice cracking with the weight of her words. You lied to me. You kept secrets. And now, my whole life feels like it's been a lie. Jack knelt in front of her, his eyes searching hers. I know I've hurt you. But I was trying to protect you. I didn't know how to tell you the truth about your father. I didn't want to drag you into this world. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. But you did, Jack. You dragged me in the moment you came back into my life. Jack reached out, taking her hands in his. I know, and I'm sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. Olivia looked down at their joined hands, her heart aching with the weight of her decision. She could push him away, walk out of this room and never look back. Or she could stay. She could fight with him, for him, despite everything that had happened. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack's grip tightened on her hands. You don't have to. Just trust me now. Let me make this right. For a long moment Olivia was silent. And then, slowly she nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The night had been long, but the silence that followed the fight was even longer. Olivia sat by the window of the safe house, staring out at the darkened streets below. Jack had told her they would be safe here at least for a while, but the weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air. She couldn't stop thinking about what Jack had revealed. Her father, a man she had idolized growing up, was connected to this dangerous world. It didn't make sense. How could her father have been involved in something like this without her ever knowing? Jack sat beside her, his face lined with exhaustion. He hadn't said much since the fight, but Olivia could feel the tension radiating off him. What aren't you telling me? She asked quietly, her voice cutting through the silence. Jack looked at her, his expression guarded. There's more, Olivia. I didn't want to tell you everything at once, but I found something else. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Jack took a deep breath, his eyes dark with the weight of his words. Your father wasn't just connected to these people. He was part of their inner circle. He was one of them. Olivia's mind reeled. That's impossible. My father, he would never. I found the files, Jack interrupted gently. There's no doubt. He was involved, Olivia. And now they think you might know something. That's why they're coming after you. The room seemed to spin around her. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about her family, was falling apart. Her father, a man she had loved and trusted, had been hiding secrets from her all along. Olivia looked at Jack, her voice barely a whisper. What do we do now? Jack's expression hardened. We find out the truth. We finish this. Olivia nodded, the fear in her chest giving way to a new determination. She wasn't just running from the danger anymore. Now she was ready to face it head-on. But as the night deepened, one thing became clear. This wasn't over. Not even close.